Welcome to American Education FM, everybody. I'm Dr. Sean Brooks. Okay, I'll tell you what, let me start off with this. Just right out of the gate here. Let me get over this eclipse nonsense. Personally, and I can't be the only person who thinks this way, this eclipse nonsense is just that. This is a money-making scheme. This is a giant psyop, certainly. It's an attention getter. It's an attention distractor. It's more of trust government, trust the state, trust us. We'll close things down for your safety, listen to us, and all that other nonsense. I cannot believe the number of people that are panicking or falling for this or connecting these particular dots, saying something's going to happen, saying something's not going to happen, and they're trying to touch on every single possible scenario that they can. It's just exhausting. I mean, do these people not have lives? They're actually traveling from point A to point B to get closer to the path of totality because they want to make sure that, what? They can see something with their own eyes that is going to last just a couple of minutes. I don't get it. I really don't. Again, these are the same people who fell for the COVID stuff. These are the exact same kinds of people that fall for the latest thing. You know, it's the flavor of the month, so now everybody has to participate. No, if you're not participating, then you're just a party pooper. Well, no, that's not it. It means I don't get yanked around by the back of the neck or I'm not on some leash just doing what everybody else is doing. I mean, yeah, I'm going to look at it, but I'm not going to have to travel someplace or get in some giant group in a field. Be like, I can't believe it. Look at all of this. I mean, who does that? And unfortunately, it's a lot of people. That's who. That's the sad part. It is just showing the number of people who are not awake. The number of people who just can't think for themselves and say, forget it, who cares? Move on. Not to mention, of course, as I've said in previous episodes, they're missing the most important piece of the entire thing. It's proof that God is real. It's proof that we don't live on a spinning ball. But all of that's being missed. I mean, the actual point of the whole thing is being missed. And I'm sure there's even more points to it that are far more biblical than the ones that I just brought up there. But yikes, I just don't understand. In fact, let me mention this too. It's not related by any stretch, but it is related from a brainwashing standpoint and a naivete standpoint. I watched two scenarios. I actually watched one scenario and then I heard another scenario be described. You can hear the first scenario, which I'll describe in my last war video. Again, you can watch it over there, and I'll just, again, without playing the audio, I'll do my best to describe it. It's a woman on TikTok, and she's looking into her phone, and she's describing this situation where she was in a grocery store with her young child and her husband, but her husband was somewhere else in the grocery store, while she was having this interaction with either an illegal alien or a female who could have been a human trafficker or a child trafficker or something along those lines. Either way, the woman is describing this interaction that she had, and she says that this woman came up to her in a cart, with a grocery cart, and she had a few things in her grocery cart, and then she was asking for the woman to pay for her groceries. Pretty straightforward, pretty ridiculous. I understand people would have different takes on this particular scenario, but it seemed rather strange. I, of course, would not participate in this. If somebody came up to me in a grocery store and said, can you pay for my groceries? My answer is no. And it's not because I'm an asshole. It's just because that's strange, and you're soliciting, and you shouldn't be doing that, and you shouldn't be doing that. So either way, during this interaction, she tells her that if she pays for her groceries, this other woman ends up coming up who is apparently a partner with this woman. And she says that if she pays for her groceries, she'll give her friend who's standing next to her will give her these the earbuds, the Apple earbuds, basically, the wireless earbuds. And she goes, no, I don't need the earbuds. You can keep them. She goes, but let me, my husband might be able to pay for this, so let's just go pay for your groceries. And they kept pushing the earbuds on the woman, saying, well, thank you, here, take the earbuds. Take the earbuds, we insist. And ultimately, again, they I think they paid for the groceries. They kept the earbuds and then they ended up leaving, even though they were persisting on getting the woman to take the earbuds for paying for their groceries. Either way, what she ends up saying at the end of the video is that the earbuds are trackable and that it would allow the individuals who are tracking the earbuds to then follow them home to their home to potentially rob them or take their child or murder them or do something else. So let's go backwards in this particular situation very quickly. If a person finds themselves in that kind of a situation, and by the way, the reason I'm bringing this up, and in particular this second scenario, which I'll mention in a minute, is that naivete in these kinds of situations will get people killed. And there are very quick things that people need to do in situations like this, I think, because the sociology behind it I find fascinating. Again, the lack of thinking that goes on and how people get cornered and they immediately feel like they need to talk to somebody or, have an interaction or even help somebody out in one of these situations. So, regarding this woman's situation in the grocery store, let me just mention this. In a situation like that, in my opinion, your answer should be no immediately. Can you pay for my groceries? No. And then you go about your business. You leave the situation. Now, if the people are persisting and they're following you, that's a problem. I would go so far as to even leave my cart there and walk out of the entire grocery store immediately. Because again, them following you is bizarre. Even if you're armed. Doesn't matter if you're armed or you're not. You should be armed, but even if you aren't, you should just leave then. That way, again, any further proposition that takes place on their part toward you would be less likely to happen, basically. Now, even in that situation, someone might say, well, go to customer service and tell the manager, ask to speak to the manager and tell them that someone is soliciting inside of their store and trying to get you to buy something off of them, or for them rather, and then be given something in exchange. And that you find all of this odd and that they're not allowed to do that and blah, blah, blah. I would take it a step further. If these people are following you in a grocery store, again, you should just leave. Leave the entire property. And then maybe call the store later on and call the manager later on and say, here's what happened earlier. You can look at your own security footage. You can take a look at these people. Here was the time that I was here. I left my cart in this aisle. And then I left, and then, these individuals hopefully didn't follow me out, and so on and so on. My point is that as I was listening to her describe the entire situation, I was thinking to myself, you're giving these people, these complete strangers, way too much slack. And you're giving them way too much attention. There's absolutely no reason, certainly not in this day and age, for us to be talking with complete and utter strangers. Not that it's a bad thing necessarily, but I mean, if they're approaching you, asking you to pay for their shit, and then pushing a technological device on you and insisting that you take it, this is beyond strange. And it's clearly a tactic, and it's not a good one. It's clearly a nefarious one. But the longer you stay in the situation, the worse things can become. Because who's to say that there were only two women working with one another in this situation? There could have been a man involved. Could have been a third person, could have been a driver outside. Again, who's to say, who's to know? But you've got to get out of those situations as fast as humanly possible. Which leads me to this second scenario. And this was something that, again, this level of naivete is going to get people killed, and it already has. I mean, there are endless situations where this has been the case. I don't know if they're an illegal or not, but they're a tall black man, and they're in Ireland, and they're standing basically in this sort of intersection area. Okay, again, this video is on Gab, and I saw it the other day, and I thought I got to break this down. But there's another individual taping this black guy, so it's a team. It's a team of two people. We can assume that they're both black. One's taping from a distance with a cell phone, and then the other black individual is having social interactions, purposefully awkward social interactions with the people that are walking past him. He's also wearing a microphone because, again, you can hear him clearly from the cell phone, which is some distance away. This black guy looks at this older gentleman who's walking past him, and he shouts something at him like, "Hey, why did you just call me the N-word?" And the white guy turns and he looks at him and he's confused, but he keeps walking. He doesn't stop and interact with the individual. Then the black guy ends up stopping this white kid. And I mean, he's clearly a teenager, maybe early 20s, but he looks very naive. And he looks at him and he says, "Hey man," he goes, do you like people like me?" And he goes, "Yeah, sure, fine. Why?" And he goes, "Oh, all right, because you don't hate people like me, do you?" And then he just, he keeps having this conversation with a complete stranger. But again, he's egging this kid on purpose to get him to do something while he's being taped without him knowing, so that if he actually engages in any kind of an illegal action, that this black guy might have a lawsuit, or at the very least get somebody arrested for one reason or another. He looks at the white kid and he tries to get the white kid to call him the N-word. The white kid looks at him and goes, I'm not going to say that." And he goes, "Oh, why not? Why not?" He goes, say it to me. And it just becomes kind of this very awkward, again, sociopathology, psychopathology interaction that this black guy, who's clearly a psycho, is having with this very naive, scrawny, white Irish kid. And again, the black guy is bigger and he's taller. But either way, this interaction right here again is an interaction that shouldn't be happening, number one, but you shouldn't even be giving that kind of an interaction the time. Again, there's really only two interactions, or I should say responses, that a person should have in these kinds of instances. You either walk away with your eyes still on the individual, keeping a good look as to who they are, or you drop them. You just knock them out cold. It's got to be one or the other. I mean, you could scream and you could shout and you could, I suppose, turn the tables on the individual and make it sound like they're doing something to you that they're not doing. But again, it just highlights the naivete in those two situations among certainly an older adult female. She's probably in her 40s, again, married with a child, and then this late teen, early 20s kid who's having a complete interaction with a complete stranger who's manipulating the kid to his face. I mean, they're even high-fiving. He's like, "Oh, yeah, all right, you won't call me the N-word. Let's high-five. Now we're friends." He goes, "We're friends, right?" And he's like, yeah, we're friends." This kid, again, if the guy was armed or had a knife, you probably wouldn't have a gun, not in Ireland. But if he had a knife and certainly the intent to kill, or the want to kill, or at least rob him, he could have. And then the question becomes, as we've even seen in numerous videos, and certainly heard about, is how many people would actually come to that kid's aid? Same thing with the woman in the grocery store. If the woman is getting assaulted, who in a grocery store is going to come to that woman's aid? How are you going to be able to discern who the good person is and who the bad person is? Might be a little harder with women, hard to tell. Not to mention, again, if one of them is armed and you get involved, who's to say that the armed individual won't turn on you? Again, situations like this can escalate in the blink of an eye. Again, another example, I think, which we've seen numerous times, has to do with subways and the behavior that exists on subways. If you're like me and you've seen these videos of these individuals on subways where they're acting, again, completely insane on a subway, and everybody is just staring at their phones like, "Oh, that's just a crazy person." Yes, the crazy person is carrying a knife, and yes, the crazy person is acting as if they're stabbing somebody when they're not, and no one's doing anything. People are taping it. People are trying to ignore it because they actually believe that ignoring the behavior that is clearly a life-threatening behavior, that somehow ignoring it is going to keep them safe. That, if they stare at their cell phone, or if they try to talk politely with the individual, that somehow they'll remain safe. I don't understand this at all. You have one of two options. Again, you either leave the situation or you drop the person. Again, I've brought this up before, I think, but in those subway situations, you'll see a particular interaction take place that's clearly a physical one and a violent one, and everybody stands up and runs away, even while they're taping it and while they're recording it. They're all running away. But again, if they all just went after the person at the exact same time, the situation would end, and that would be the end of it. This, of course, is part of the abomination having to do with uh, the white Marine, who, of course, has been arrested for murder for defending himself and everybody on a subway for choking, subduing and choking the guy who happened to die on a subway in New York. It's that situation all over again. But again, people can't think that way. And we can't be so pacified that we're thinking, well, if I do the right thing and subdue the person or knock them out or whatever, then I'll be prosecuted or brought up on charges of assault and battery. You can't think that way. If they bring charges against you, then they bring charges against you. Big deal. Go after the person, save a life, de-escalate a situation, or like I said earlier with those other situations, keep moving. Ignore them and keep moving, but keep an eye on them. Don't turn your back on these kinds of people. I don't know. I've always found these kinds of social situations to be remarkably interesting. Again, you can pick the environment. It happens at stadiums all the time. In the crowds, people get to drinking and then they get stupid and then all of a sudden they start slapping each other and then a couple of people intervene, but most people are just sitting in their seats minding their own business. Again, I think it's ridiculous, but we just can't give any social manipulator, I should say, the time of day. Again, keep an eye on them. Deny any of their advances, keep moving, leave the situation completely, or just drop the person. It's got to be one of the two. Okay, so I just wanted to mention that. Again, I've always found that kind of sociology to be rather interesting, and how people react in social situations. And again, I'm more of the fight kind of person than I am the flight. I tend to not run away from a crisis or a particular situation. If somebody's being hurt or I can hear it, I'm instantly in it and running toward it. I just find that interesting switch that goes on inside of people to be fascinating, because it's clearly different with a great deal of people. And not everybody is wired to run toward a problem or solve a problem quickly. They're more likely to, again, just run away from a particular situation. So I'm not saying that every situation, a person should run toward, but yeah, I think you get what I'm saying. It's a social awareness thing. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people who are not socially aware. Hence, of course, the eclipse nonsense. I mean, my God. It was back in whatever it was, October, November, when they were closing schools for the eclipse, which is, Monday. Again, it's just more social control, basically. So, yeah, it's exhausting, though. Speaking of exhausting social control, let me mention this. I got an email from the Michigan business owner friend who contributes to the show with a great deal of information, certainly from a business standpoint, and then insurance and a lot of other stories, of course, that I've brought up, and the happenings that are going on with, of course, the collapse of the number of individuals that are living, and how that's, of course, impacting a great deal of things, among other social events, of course, that are occurring. They also have the Substack, again, chemtrails.substack.com. I recommend bouncing over there and subscribing if you want to. They're putting out currently a multi-part Substack on dinosaurs and the hoax that is dinosaurs. It's fascinating. In fact, we had a funny exchange back and forth where they openly stated that they lost subscribers as a result of putting out the dinosaur hoax articles, and how some people, again, who claim to clamor for the truth just can't handle all of the truth. I find that remarkable, and of course they do too, and think it's absolutely hilarious. But either way, they sent me this particular email, and this is interesting, and this is one of the ways that they are certainly trying to attack small businesses, and this is a new attack according to them, that many businesses, if not certainly all of the ones that rely on credit cards and producing a product and then selling a product to individuals, certainly in customer service, so to speak, and how this is going to impact, again, the actual businesses themselves. So give this a listen real quick. I'm going to read this verbatim, and again, this is certainly an attack, and certainly making it harder on business owners to work with credit card companies to get the right thing done. And then, of course, penalizing them and penalizing businesses for not being able to work it out with the customer, even though it's the business that's on the short end of this stick. So here's what they said. They said, quote, "The credit card companies made a major play to destroy small businesses. You know how you can file a credit card dispute against a purchase you made if the item never arrived, or if it was defective, or if your credit card numbers were stolen and fraudulently used to make a purchase. They said when you file a chargeback with your credit card company, your card company immediately yanks the full chargeback amount out of the business's bank account rather, and gives it back to you. It is then the business's task to prove you wrong or quote unquote accept the dispute, meaning they agree to let the buyer keep the merchandise plus issue a full refund so the case can be closed. In many cases, such as fraud, there's no way for me to prove the buyer wrong, so I have to accept the dispute. But in other cases, such as, quote, item never received, unquote, I can show proof it was delivered. The process takes around 90 days, and during that time, the business doesn't have the inventory because they shipped it, and the business doesn't have the money because it was forcibly withdrawn from their bank. One of the newer reasons people are allowed to file a dispute as quote-unquote not as described, which, by the way, you can see that on Amazon all the time, and even eBay, I believe in some cases too. They said, which is complete bullshit because the company who sold the merchandise gets hit with the dispute, which comes from the buyer's credit card company, and costs the small business $40. Yet the business has no idea what exactly the buyer is unhappy with because there's no details. Not as described, quote unquote, is weaponized against businesses, with nearly 100% of not as described chargebacks being nothing more than buyer's remorse. But the buyer doesn't want to return the merchandise, so instead of contacting the business and asking to return it, they just file a chargeback, quote, not as described. So all the business can do is eat the $40 dispute fee and respond to the dispute showing the credit card company what the product listing said, then hope that the credit card company agrees with them. If the credit card company agrees with the buyer, then the business loses the merchandise, the buyer gets to keep it. The payment for the merchandise, which was already taken from their bank account, plus the $40 dispute fee. Thankfully, 90% of the time, the credit card company agrees with the business, so the business loses $40 dispute fee, the buyer keeps the merchandise, and the dispute is closed. And then they said this, but if the credit card company agrees with the business, the buyer can re-dispute, quote-unquote, the charge, and the process starts again. They said, here's the new method they found to fuck us. The new rule is, when a buyer re-disputes a charge, if the credit card company agrees with the buyer this time around, the business loses the inventory, buyer gets to keep it, loses the payment for the merchandise, buyer was refunded at the business's expense, loses the $40 dispute fee, and now will be penalized an additional $500 regardless of the cost of the item. The credit card companies are claiming that, quote, this incentivizes businesses to work issues out with their buyers by issuing a refund instead of fighting a dispute, unquote. But there is no way to work something out with a buyer who never contacted you, never told you what is wrong, and instead filed a dispute that you are now forced to respond to. They said on top of all of this, the credit card companies have increased the length of time which buyers can file disputes. It was 90 days. Now it's 180 days. Imagine that. You buy a shirt online in January and you have until the end of June to decide if you want your money back, unquote. I responded and I said, what if you start saying that all of your items are no refunds are available and all sales are final, and you just kind of make that, your general terms of service. they immediately replied back and said a chargeback overrules all terms of service. I did not know that. And that's really, really awful. Again, I have no doubt that they're doing this to pinch small businesses. I think that's pretty clear. I'll take basically an even different angle on this too. It's highly conceivable that the credit card companies are doing this because the credit card companies don't want to get involved anymore because it happens with such regularity and because they're short-staffed. Again, look at customer service in general and the individuals that are on the other ends of those phones all of the time. We have to assume those people are jabbed, in particular if they're in foreign countries. They probably all had to go along with it. Again, somebody shows up into their office or wherever they're all packed in like sardines, talking on telephones with headsets and the whole thing. It's not Jake from State Farm, by the way. It's usually, Indian females, certainly in a foreign country, if not India itself, and they're all packed in there. And again, if somebody shows up and says, well, you all need to get the jabs because these are important, and they'll go, oh, okay, well, we have to assume that, again, the population is decreasing. And this is clearly an avenue of the credit game and the business game that they don't want to deal with anymore. I think our business owner friend would basically say, do whatever you can to work it out with the actual seller themselves. Reach out to the individual, openly state, hey, look, why don't you like it? Is it the wrong size? Is it the wrong color? Does it not fit properly? Send it back, and then once you send it back, then we'll refund you or we'll send you, a new one if you want it. And yeah. Again, I've experienced that myself through eBay. I mean, they don't want the item back. They just want you to keep it, and then they say, we'll just send you another one. Again, if it is in fact defective and you can prove it, they still don't want it back. Even though it may work, there might be, a piece or something that's broken on it, but, it's still functional. They'll just still send you another one because, I don't know, they don't want the shipping, they don't want to pay for it. They don't want the complaint, they don't want to worry about any kind of a dispute, but either way, yeah. If you can work it out with a business, work it out with a business instead of immediately, running to the credit card company and screaming bloody murder, because that's not going to help out the business at all. So there you go. All right. And then there's this. Again, speaking of not helping businesses, these transitions are outrageous. This one, again, leaning now into the education avenue here, and I have plenty to bring up, so I might as well kick it off with this. Greg Abbott is at it again in Texas, ladies and gentlemen. This is from informationliberation.com, and this was from the end of March, but it was titled, Texas Governor Greg Abbott signs executive order to punish anti-Semitic rhetoric on college campuses. I have to tell you, this one-sided approach to freedom of speech is alarming, and it should alarm everybody, and it should look beyond suspicious. And I think this is also why endless people are waking up to this. It's these kinds of moves that are waking people up to who really controls or attempts to control the mainstream narrative and certainly everything that everybody claims to own. Of course, we're talking about Jewish supremacy here to some extent, certainly. But the general hypocrisy of all of this is glaring. It's beyond glaring. So whites can get made fun of on college campuses and be discriminated against, and you can have entire coursework dedicated to making fun of white people. You can have professors force books that students have to buy, bashing white people within the books, and they have to buy them because it's course content and they have, the academic freedom to be able to teach it if they want to and blah, blah, blah. But you can't for the life of you bring up anything having anything to do with Jews or quote-unquote anti-Semitism, so they say. And then, of course, they probably manipulate the definition of that made-up word to cater to an individual's feelings. Again, you've heard me bring up in the past how human resources departments at universities basically have these very anonymous equity judgment boards or offices or whatever you would want to call it. They're basically an anonymous complaint avenue of the entire university. So if a student has a complaint against a professor, whether it be real or manufactured, They can anonymously report a professor or even a student to these particular boards, and then the university actually investigates. They then, of course, go on a headhunting tour. They look out for the individual, they blast them with emails, they make meetings with them, all on allegations. And then the individual shows up, if they're stupid, and and they show up and they address this particular issue. Again, not even knowing what the issue is about, but it could be completely manufactured. My point is that apparently you can do this with just about anybody, but God forbid a real complaint comes in about someone who's actually Jewish. I mean, what are they going to do then? Doesn't that sort of by default crush this entire, we won't tolerate anti-Semitism? Well, it's a made-up word. So what does it even mean? How are you even applying any of this? But here's what this says. Again, this was a tweet from him at the end of March. An X post, however you want to say it. It says, Austin, Governor Greg Abbott today issued an executive order to fight the increase in acts of anti-Semitism at colleges and universities in Texas and ensure a safe learning environment for Jewish students and all Texans. It says, quote, again, why it says all Texans and then you single out Jewish students? I don't get it. It says, quote, anti-Semitism is never acceptable in Texas, and we will do everything we can to fight it, said Greg Abbott. Quote, the state of Texas stands with Israel and the Jewish community, and we must accelerate our efforts to protect against anti-Semitism at Texas colleges and universities and across our state. Across the country, acts of anti-Semitism have grown in number, size, and danger to the Jewish community since Hamas's deadly attack on October 7th, which, by the way, I'm sorry, still no proof anything happened. There just isn't. Texas took immediate action to protect Jewish schools, synagogues, and other key locations. Many Texas colleges and universities also acted quickly to condemn anti-Semitism, but some radical organizations on our campuses engaged in acts that have no place in Texas. Now we must work to ensure that our college campuses are safe spaces for members of the Jewish community. Listen to the way he talks. Safe spaces. That's what leftists say. That's what communists and Marxists and Bolsheviks say. And that's who Greg Abbott is. Let's face it. He's a Marxist, period. He rolls around in his wheelchair screaming that he's a conservative and, the Bush family and Bushes and conservatives and don't mess with Texas and all this other bullshit. But let's face the facts here. The guy's a Marxist. Full blown. You can't engage in your First Amendment right and criticize anybody who's Jewish, certainly not Israel, and the slaughter and the genocide that they're continuously engaging in. Most recently, of course, the World Central Kitchen deaths, where they were targeted and then, of course, slaughtered. Again, a charitable organization trying to feed starving Palestinians who are being starved to death by Israel. But if you make mention of this on apparently any Texas campus, either with the sign or a flag or anything, which is really, it's just called education and exercising your First Amendment right. No. You're an anti-Semite now, according to Greg Abbott. This is disgusting. It says the governor's executive order requires that all higher education institutions in Texas review their free speech policies to establish appropriate punishments for anti-Semitic rhetoric on college and university campuses, ensure that policies that address the sharp rise of anti-Semitic acts are enforced, and include the definition of anti-Semitism in free speech policies. Ladies and gentlemen, no one should be going to colleges and universities anymore. Period. I mean, on many of them, you can't even carry a gun. It's just nuts. And of course, they got endless Twitter pictures of him here kissing the wall and holding up a menorah that he was given as a gift and 1,000 other things. This is disgusting. It's beyond disgusting. We have a First Amendment right, and why would anybody have to revisit their First Amendment rights? Let's take that into consideration here for a minute, too. Greg Abbott just told people told college campuses more specifically, to revisit their First Amendment rules and regulations. Well, it's not a rule or a regulation. It's a law. given to us by God, that we have the freedom to do this. But, again, according to him, no, you don't. You need to revisit the Constitution and the First Amendment. So saith Greg Abbott. That's absurd. Greg Abbott is a full-blown Marxist, period. And yeah, he's got to be blackmailed like nobody's business. It's absolutely amazing. So, who knows? I'm just shocked anybody even goes to these colleges and universities anymore. It blows me away. Okay. Here we go. More education stuff. I've got a great deal, and unfortunately, a lot of it's really gay. So, here we go. I wrote a Substack, you're probably aware. It's probably my most graphic Substack that I've put together, but it had to be put together, ladies and gentlemen, and I hope that you can bookmark it somewhere on a device of yours and reference it to individuals if you want to make a point. So the title of it is The Final Result of the LGBTQ Agenda in American Schools. This is what American schools openly advocate for, so why not show them? I go through the entire process of the surgery that is involved with the so-called gender reassignment surgeries, both the phalloplasty and vaginoplasty procedures. There's a few pictures involved, as you might expect. And specifically from one of the websites which describes the procedure, specifically regarding a vaginoplasty, which is where you're making a vagina, although you can't even do that. The irony is astounding. There are even more graphic pictures that describe the step-by-step process. Again, my background is in health education, anatomy, and physiology, and the interesting part about this, certainly from a sociological standpoint, I think, too, and a movement, quote-unquote, standpoint, is that the very psychos that support these agendas, again, the gay agendas, the LGBT alphabet soup nonsense, and of course, the gender-affirming care, as they like to call it, the people who support all of this, they never want to focus on what the end result is, which you've heard me bring up on the show numerous times. They don't even want to look at what the end result is and actually see it and pay attention to the step-by-step process of what it actually entails. Because let's face it, if these people really agreed with all of this, they'd all be walking around with butcher knives, cutting themselves to pieces, and then cutting up the people around them to pieces. But see, this is the problem. They don't want to pay attention to any of that. And specifically, school boards themselves, and the school boards that support these kinds of quote-unquote movements, which ultimately end up getting the very participants killed. Again, in the article, I bring up numerous examples and sort of comparisons, but again, one of them is like saying that an individual buys an automobile just because of the steering wheel. And they don't want to look at any other parts of the automobile, and they're not interested in any other parts of the automobile, so they can't be bothered with it. They just want to stare at the steering wheel. And that's why they support the entire automobile, is just because of the steering wheel. That's ridiculous. Again, you can't wave the rainbow flag and only support one thing. You're either all in or you're all out. You're either all in it or you're all against it. You can't pick and choose which pieces of this insanity you want to be a part of, and which pieces you support and which pieces you don't. Yes, I'm for gay marriage, and people should have the freedom to do whatever they want. But you're right, cutting your dick off is a bad idea. I mean, come on, you can't have it both ways. Because that's what the flag represents. That's what that entire flag was built for. It wasn't for people's rights. It wasn't so that people could live peacefully without being made fun of. And don't make fun of us, we're just perverts. I mean, that's not, that wasn't it. And you would think that even those individuals would know that by now, that the entire scheme was deliberately laid out as a step-by-step process to slowly erode people's individual rights and to, of course, slowly increase the likelihood of mental illness and normalizing this kind of insanity. That's what the flag represented all along. But the people waving it were just pawns. They were just being used in the entire process, and many of them, unfortunately, still don't have that figured out. So either disassociate or go all in. And you better support the gender affirming care, and you better be okay with looking at the pictures. Because ultimately, the point that I make is not only, of course, does the suicide rate dramatically increase and drug addiction and 1,000 other things, which, of course, the end result, which I openly state, is death, and that should go without saying at this point. But if you were to make a presentation like this in a school board meeting, they would shut you down. If you brought visuals and you put these pictures of this quote-unquote gender-affirming care, which is just genital mutilation, and of course, again, all the health problems that come with it and 1,000 other things, not to mention the cost. I mean, holy hell. And then, of course, all the follow-up visits and everything, which I detail in the actual article itself. But if you brought this to the faces of the lunatics in American K12 schools or even university settings, but more specifically within K12 schools, and show them what they're actually supporting, they would shut you down. They would have to adjourn their meeting and run out of the room. And that, of course, just highlights their entire hypocrisy. That's the hypocrisy of all of these people. They're hypocrites on an individual level and certainly as a collective. Because when you bring the truth to them, they want nothing to do with it. And when you show them the thing that they are supporting, they want nothing to do with it. So I would encourage people to do that, though. I mean, why not prove the point? We know what the result is going to be without even doing it. So I fully understand that people aren't going to do it. And people will say, well, Sean, why don't you do it? Well, I've done it. And I know exactly how they react. And I fully get it. They either get real quiet because you've got them right where you want them, or they interrupt you. They start to scream and panic and flail about because they're insane, and then they run out of the room. So it's one of those two. It's going to be one of those two. They're not going to have an open dialogue with you back and forth like, wow, this is really interesting. Thank you for this horrific presentation. I can't believe I didn't take that into consideration before I supported it in the first place. I mean, they're not going to do that. But even so, again, it just highlights their hypocrisy. So let me get into a few more things because, again, there's a trend here. And this trend, unfortunately, has been going on for quite some time. And I hope that people understand that this can't be reversed. This is not something that the Heritage Foundation can come in and reform, ladies and gentlemen. Again, Donald Trump can say all he wants about we're not going to fund this school or that school if they do this thing or they do that thing. Ultimately, again, the state has the say, and if the state writes laws that make their schools more degenerate than they already are, well, then the money's going to keep flowing. But the only way that the money stops flowing is with a lack of participation, which you've clearly heard me say a million times here. So there's this particular story. Again, let's throw some facts at these brainwashed goons who support genital mutilation, whether they say they do or they don't. There was this particular story from last week. It was titled, Illinois Trans-Identified Male Pleads Guilty After Issuing Disturbing School Shooting Child Rape Threats. It's a dude trying to look like a woman. It says a trans-identified male in Illinois who threatened to commit a school shooting and rape children has pled guilty to one count of interstate communication with a threat to injure. Alexa Willie, also known as Jason Lee Willie, so we'll call him Jason, was arrested on August 14th after going on extended rants listing local children as targets. As previously reported, Willie was arrested in Perry County, Illinois, after the Springfield area FBI intercepted a live stream on social media they deemed suspicious. In the stream, which was broadcast through networking platform MeetMe, honest to God, I mean, who uses these platforms? I mean, we know who uses these platforms. I've never even heard of MeetMe, but it doesn't sound good at all. Just call it Meet a Pedophile. That's basically all it is. Meet a rapist. Meetyourfuturerapist.com. Let's see. It says the FBI later determined that Willie had been issuing the threats from a period from March to August of 2023, making obscene comments about harming children in the name of transgender rights. There you go. In March, Willie was observed at a MeetMe user, saying, quote, "We're out here walking into your school, shooting your children, and I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to be one of them, and the FBI isn't going to stop me, but I'm going to kill your children out here, unquote. There you go. And of course, it gets into the Nashville shooting and the tranny who allegedly killed people with no proof and blah, blah, blah. And it goes into all of that. Which, by the way, speaking of fake school shootings, this was brought to my attention, and I remembered this once it was reminded to me about Sandy Hook. That the entire Sandy Hook Elementary property, and certainly, I believe, the town of Newtown, if I'm not mistaken, is what is called an unincorporated property. And it was our Michigan business friend who brought this to my attention. And apparently, having then looked it up, unincorporated properties essentially mean that the laws of the land do not equate, so to speak, or do not have jurisdiction on those kinds of properties, and that there are numerous unincorporated properties that exist, and apparently Las Vegas is even one of those properties, which means, again, from a fake shooting standpoint or even a real shooting standpoint, it means if a real one takes place, they don't have to prosecute anybody. And if a fake one takes place, because of course they're unincorporated and the laws don't apply, if they don't want them to, then that means that the local police don't have to do anything about it. So then, of course, I asked about what about Uvalde? And what about the Covenant Presbyterian Church there in Nashville, Tennessee? I wonder if those are unincorporated properties as well. My money is on yes. I'm going to take a guess and say yes, which means it's a stage. They can stage it for a real shooting if they want, get somebody killed and not prosecute, like I said earlier, or they can stage something completely, make it completely fake, sell it to the people like it's real when it's not prosecute anybody, and then just spin a yarn for the public to believe it, and then they will. I find it fascinating. I just find all of this fascinating. But again, if you think logically about it, without emotion, and you just say, well, okay, this is a thing. You can look this up. Anybody can look this up. Unincorporated properties are real. This is an actual thing, then yeah, it makes those situations far less believable from a real crisis standpoint, and it makes them far more believable that you can, of course, stage whatever you want to stage. Anyway, moving on again, more sex in schools, why not? Which, by the way, keep in mind, much of this, of course, is being directed by the UN, the World Health Organization, and the World Economic Forum, which, of course, I've brought up on the show numerous times, all of which are Jewish, as it turns out. This is from the libertydaily.com. It is titled The Inclusive, quote-unquote, Sex Education That Leftists Are Pushing in Schools Puts Kids at Risk. No kidding. It's the obvious statement of the century. It says, as suicide rates, sexual assaults, mass depression, and anxiety grip America's youth, the Biden administration, state legislators, and public school districts have begun usurping science education with, quote, transgender and gender nonconforming curriculum. Students in over a dozen states no longer have access to biologically based sex education. That's been replaced by liberal laws and policies requiring classrooms to exchange biologically proven facts with pseudoscientific advocacy for gender fluidity. Despite the claims of the U.S. Department of Education, no quantitative studies show gender transition or gender nonconformity, quote-unquote, is a healthy or normal part of human development. It says these child-targeted policy prescriptions are often sweetened artificially by using comfortable terminology such as comprehensive, inclusive, and gender-affirming, to paint those who disagree with the unscientific, immoral content aimed at minors as bigoted and heartless. And remember, it's anti-Semitic too. I'm sure Greg Abbott would throw that in there just for good measure. It says if parents respond negatively to the content of these postmodern sex education revisions, news outlets which may claim to be unbiased use those gaslighting terms in their coverage of the outrage. It says this effectively gatekeeps any debate about negative consequences by portraying dissidents as knuckle-dragging Neanderthals or anti-Semites. After all, what kind of monster wouldn't be inclusive and affirming? It goes on and on and on. And here's another horrific story. Again, this is the environment. This is what's going on. We send our kids to schools. I mean, what's the yarn they always say? We send our kids to schools because, we just hope that they're going to be safe. And we believe that the school is safe and the school's supposed to be a safe place and blah, 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 blah. I mean, how many times did this family right here say that or think that to themselves? And then here was the result. This is from the Daily Mail. It was titled, Family of Portland Girl 9 File $9 million lawsuit against school, quote, where she was gang raped in bathroom by 2 boys with attackers suspended for just 1 day. That right there, again, it's American K12 education in a nutshell. Here were the bullet points below it. A 9-year-old girl's family has filed a lawsuit against Portland Public Schools. The suit alleged that the girl was sexually assaulted by 2 male students and the boys were suspended for 1 day following the incident, the lawsuit said. More specifics on this one, here we go. It says, last month, the family of the unidentified 9-year-old girl filed the suit in Multnomah, I'm saying that right? Probably not. Multnomah County Circuit Court, and alleged both the district and a nonprofit after-school program failed to protect the youngster. According to the lawsuit, in April of 2022, 2 male students in the program, Schools Uniting Neighborhoods, quote-unquote, and Scott Elementary School in Northeast Portland, told the girl that they would, quote-unquote, find out where she lives if she didn't tell the staff she needed to use the bathroom. She complied and went to the bathroom as the other students followed her, locked her in the stall, took off her pants, and each forcibly penetrated her, the lawsuit reviewed by Oregon Live stated. As she tried to ward them off, the boys made it impossible for her to escape as they took turns blocking the doors, documents said. The father of one of the boys reported the incident, and his son and the other boy were suspended for just 1 day, the lawsuit said. Prior to their suspension, instead of getting the police involved, here we go, here it comes, in the alleged sexual assault, PPS staff undertook their own internal investigation, the lawsuit said. Of course they did. It says staff also interviewed the girl without telling the parents. That's illegal. Family or any legal representative, according to the suit. According to court documents, 6 days after the alleged assault, the victim's father took her to Randall Children's Hospital for an evaluation. A week after the visit, she was seen at a child abuse program called CARES Northwest, where medical staff were told about the incident and concluded that the history provided was highly concerning for sexual abuse, the lawsuit said. You think? It says, according to the legal filing, since the alleged attack, the young girl has been suffering from pain, trauma, a gap in education, well, that's the least of her worries at this point, and social anxiety brought on by the incident. She was raped, yeah. It says the 9-year-old's father proceeded to transfer his daughter and younger son to another school. There you go. Just send him to another building. That's how it gets done. Do these people not know? I mean, I'm sorry for the high pitch, but do these people not know that homeschooling is a thing? That these children can read and write? And that they can do this on their own, freely, at home, without, worrying about whether or not they're going to be raped in the bathroom? Honest to God. What is wrong with these parents? It says, which took a month to accomplish this, apparently, according to the father, and disrupted his children's education. Well, if they were homeschooling, they could wake up in peace, they could go to sleep in peace, and not worry about even entering one of these mental institutions that we call schools. Again, the father's lost his mind. It says the lawsuit also noted that other alleged instances where the girl was put in similar situations by male classmates at the school. Again, she's being constantly sexually assaulted, apparently. So why is the father sending them again? It says prior to the bathroom assault, one of her classmates allegedly touched her genitals over the clothing without her consent during a class, with an educator in the room, the lawsuit said. During another incident, the girl slapped a student after he attempted to kiss the young girl without her consent. This is called a pattern, by the way. DailyMail.com contacted Portland Public School District, and they didn't get a comment back. Shocking. Let's see. We are mandatory reporters, meaning we must report any instance of possible child abuse and neglect. So saith the spokesperson for the district. They did say that, and they say, we take our responsibilities as mandatory reporters seriously and follow the law around reporting. Well, what about filing criminal charges? Apparently, you don't want to get involved with any of that. And again, it's not the school that files the criminal charges, it's the legal guardian. But this is where, as I've said on my own Substack, this is where in loco parentis does not apply. These people are really not responsible for your children. They think they are. They say they are. But when push comes to shove and the rubber meets the road, they're not. They're going to take a back seat and say, well, something bad has happened now, so it's the parents' fault. This is not our fault, and we just did everything by the book, but this is your fault because you send them here. That's the position they always end up taking. It's disgusting. And apparently, of course, and this is the icing on the cake, the two individuals who are engaging in the sexual assault of the girl, apparently they identified as women. So remember, when you wave the rainbow flag, well, you get all of it. You don't just get the pieces you like. No. You get the whole thing. That's the way it goes. And this is exactly what the whole thing entails. So there's that. Okay, good news, finally. Two quick stories here on education. This first one out of Broward County, Florida, which was sent to me by a listener of the show. Thank you for this. This is from the newpelican.com. It says, out of Broward County's 332 public schools, 67 are on the under-enrolled list. That is, operating at 70% less than capacity. And as has been well publicized, 5 of them may be closed or repurposed for the 25-26 school year. Hip, hip, hooray. It's happening, ladies and gentlemen. They're closing, and they're going to have to in the near future all over the country. Again, these districts with all these elementary schools, they're going to have to combine them. This is happening on a constant basis, and I love it. I love it. These dummies have no idea what they've done. You can't reform it, ladies and gentlemen. It just needs to be shut down. So here's what it says. It says, while most of the under-enrolled schools are in Southwest Broward, 3 are hot topics among the New Pelicans readers: Stranahan High, Northeast High, and Blanche Ely High. Superintendent Dr. Peter Licata has delayed until June making his recommendation as to which school to close or repurpose, quote-unquote. It says the issue brought a number of community leaders to a Oakland board workshop last month. Among them was Fitzgerald, or Fitz Budhoo. That's right, that's his real last name, Budhoo. Budhoo. An Oakland Park parent and president of the Neighborhood Coalition in that city. And as I've said before, I'm going to stop the article there, but you get the gist of it. They're closing. And what's funny is that the whack jobs who live in the area can't for the life of them imagine society or even living without these schools around. So all the whack jobs who are married to these school buildings, and God only knows why, they're brainwashed. Clearly that has something to do with it, but they run back to these environments. And they, again, stay in these environments and they say, well, we can't live if we don't have this school here. And this school means everything to us. And I graduated from here, and the memories that we have as a family and blah, blah, blah. I mean, again, it's get a life. Get a life. These people are so pathetic. What will happen to my old school? I can't imagine. Who cares? Again, I've been over this before. This right here is the whole TikTok fight. This is what that is. Students are learning more, in particular inquisitive students and inquisitive minors who are really interested in actual learning. They're utilizing the internet the way that it was really intended. Again, it is the World Wide Web. You can find information across the world from endless generations back to the beginning of time on the internet. You can't in a school building. You just can't. And you can't keep a failing business model of a failing school system in place as long as it's been in place and expect it to survive. Again, it's been on life support, frankly, since forever. I mean, they're basically printing money from the Federal Reserve to keep these school systems open. So they're funding it with nothing. I mean, it's not real money. It's monopoly money, and it doesn't work anymore. But what's funny is that the laws have remained the same, so that funding these buildings is still dependent on student participation. And fortunately, the student participation is decreasing. I mean, take one of my war videos, for example, okay? We're talking about memes and videos. Updated videos of the day, along with some historic videos that have real historic accurate context, and then memes and messages and motivations and whatever, however you want to phrase it, and news headlines clearly, and food for thought. You take an hour of one of those war videos, you're going to learn more in an hour. Certainly a teenager would, or somebody in middle school is going to learn more in an hour of watching one of those than they will an 8-hour day in a school building. Wrap your head around that. That's one of the major reasons why I make those videos. Again, it's designed to not only deprogram and unbrainwash, it's designed to educate. But as we know, education isn't the thing that happens in schools, is it? It's just this blind acceptance of the way that things have always been. And, well, if you disagree with it, then there's something wrong with you. So they would have people believe. Well, joke's on them. The unenrollment is increasing and the lack of attendance is increasing. Here's another one from the Daily Mail very quickly. It was titled, Gen Z is shunning college to take up traditional trades like welding and plumbing, they say is far more satisfying, which doesn't incur huge student debt. It says there's been a 16% increase in enrollment at vocational schools in 2023. Gen Zers are entering the trades due to well-paying jobs and meaningful work. And the median pay for new construction hires was $48,089 last year. And of course, as you would expect, one of the things that contributed to all of this was the fake pandemic. Because again, there was no pandemic. It says young people who came of age during the pandemic said that they have been deterred from four-year universities by high tuition and the prospect of student debt. It says instead they are attending trade schools and they are being enticed by well-paying jobs, opportunities, and satisfying work. The National Student Clearinghouse recorded a 16% increase in enrollment at two-year schools with a high vocational program focus and a 2.6% rise in community college enrollment in 2023, according to Bloomberg. It also said this a little further down in the article. It said a Gallup poll published in July of 23 found that the share of Americans who trusted higher education fell from 57% in 2015 to 36% by July of 2023. I love it. I love it. In fact, I love it so much, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to end with this one from Zero Hedge, and this is fantastic, and I'm going to read this whole thing. It was titled The Great Escape from Government Schools. This was from last Wednesday. It says the following. After enduring bullshit school shutdowns during the COVID pandemic, many students concluded that school itself must be bullshit and have skipped attending classes. Government bureaucrats are panicking since subsidies are tied to the number of students' butts in chairs each day. Duke University professor Katie Rosenbaum lamented that thanks to the pandemic, quote, our relationship with school became optional, unquote. Oh, wow. She's still misguided. That's sad. No, they just hate you because you lie. And you're brainwashed and they're figuring this out. That's why. Like I said, you can turn on a cell phone and learn more in an hour than you can in an entire semester at college. It goes on here. It says school absences have exploded almost everywhere, according to a New York Times report last week. Chronic absenteeism has almost doubled amongst public school students, rising from 15% pre-pandemic to 26% currently. Compulsory attendance laws are getting trampled far and wide. It says the New York Times suggested that something fundamental has shifted in American childhood and the culture of school in ways that may be long-lasting, unquote. Connecticut Education Commissioner Charlene M. Russell Tucker commented, there's a mouthful of a name, that, quote, there is a sense of if I don't show up, would people even miss the fact that I'm not there, unquote. The arbitrary, counterproductive student shutdowns destroyed the trust that many families had in government education systems. Yeah, I mean, many people were just on the fence and they just needed the nudge. And of course, government lying to them and engaging in fear tactics, and then, of course, all of the schools just following along, that would be the nudge that they would need. It said the New York Times reflected the tizzy afflicting education bureaucrats across the land, quote, students can't learn if they aren't in school, unquote. And then they wrote, like hell. So kids are not enduring daily indoctrination to doubt their own genders. So kids' heads are not being dunked into the latest social justice buckets of fear, loathing, and guilt. So kids are not being drilled with faulty methods of learning mathematics to satisfy the latest Common Core catechism and vainly try to close the achievement gap, quote unquote. A shortage of indoctrination is not the same as a shortfall of education. More than 70 years ago, University of Chicago President Robert Hutchins aptly observed, quote, the tremendous waste of time in the American education system must result from the fact that there is so much time to waste. John Taylor Gatto, New York's Teacher of the Year in 1991, according to the New York State Education Department, observed, quote, government schooling kills the family by monopolizing the best times of childhood and by teaching disrespect for home and parents, unquote. My view on the school absenteeism is shaped by my dissident tendencies. The author said that government schooling was the most brain-deadening experience in my life. Early in elementary school, I relished reading even more than peanut butter. But I was obliged to put down books and listen to teachers, slowing my mental intake by 80 or 90%. By the time I reached fourth grade, my curiosity was fading. Between my junior and senior years in high school, I lazed away a summer on a payroll of the Virginia Highway Department. I came to recognize that public schools were permeated with the same highway department ethos, quote unquote. Teachers learned on badly written textbooks instead of shovels. Going through the motions and staying awake until quitting time was all that mattered. Learning became equated with drudgery and submission to bored taskmakers with chalk and erasers. Devoting 2 months to dissecting Hamlet made me damn all Danes, courtiers, and psychoanalysts. The week spent on Mark Twain's The Celebrated Jumping Frog of Calaveras County story made me lust to cast all frogs and folksy 19th century authors into hell. He said the 6 weeks blighted by Paradise Lost convinced me Samuel Johnson was right. Quote, none ever wished it longer than it is, unquote. Old books, rather than the sources of wisdom and inspiration, were mental castor oil, something to forcibly imbibe solely to emit the right answers on the exams. I spent years mentally idling while teachers droned. As long as the government provided a seat in a classroom, it had fulfilled its obligations. There was never any inkling that later in life I would need to mobilize every iota of talent I might possess. My brain was like the mythical village of Brigadoon. It showed up once every year or two to take a scholastic aptitude test and then vanished into the mists. Teachers chronically noted on my permanent record, quote, not performing up to potential, unquote. Mysteries never cease. As long as I didn't fail a grade, I slipped under the radar. I was never a chronic traunt, until my family moved to a college town just before the start of my senior year in high school. I missed practically as many classes as I attended that year, scampering over to the nearby Virginia Tech campus. I scrupulously avoided going to a notorious bar only 2 blocks away during school hours. Actually, this was more expediency than principle, since the happy hour with 10-cent beer didn't commence until after the last class finished. After my class absences reached a certain threshold, I was sent to the school counselor, a perfectly co-fied 30-ish guy with an air of rectitude thick enough to cut with a knife. He asked me why I was skipping out, and I said school was mostly bunk. If I could pass classes without enduring Chinese water torture monotony, why stick around? The counselor declared my attitude unacceptable and urged me to get involved with the student government to try to fix things, unquote. That's hilarious. So I should fizzle away my time propping up the equivalent of the Vichy regime in Nazi-occupied France, Paul McCartney's Band on the Run line, stuck inside these 4 walls, sent inside forever, echoed in my head. When misbehaving kids were called to stay after school, it was called detention. But the entire system was detention, especially for the final year or two. Boredom vanished from my life almost completely on the day I graduated from high school. My mental vitality surged after I no longer lost the bulk of my days fulfilling seat time requirements. Week by week, I began to regain the love of reading that I had lost years earlier. That made all the difference for my life and writing. I recognize that many, if not most, of the new chronically absent students are probably putting their free time to good use. But at least teenagers have the chance to discover new books and to awaken their minds in a way that would never occur locked in classrooms. One epiphany is worth a dozen regurgitated exams. Maybe if politicians ceased treating kids' minds like disposable resources, more young folks would voluntarily show up for school. But generations of young kids have been sacrificed for whatever fad sweeps political and education activists. The best solution is to enable as many children as possible to exit government schools as soon as possible, unquote. That was well done. And they're right. That was written by Jim Bavard via the Libertarian Institute. Yep, he's correct. Again, you can get raped in a bathroom and still go back to school from your parents, who apparently don't understand that home learning is a thing, and that exists, and that children have the freedom to do that on a day in and day out basis, or put it down for a day and go learn something else somewhere else, and then come back home and pick it right back up again. Not in government schools, though. Again, it's a mining camp. It's a brainwashing camp. It's an MK Ultra environment. It's designed to be that way. And you need MK Ultra victims to work in these environments and to facilitate and administrate these environments to keep that going. It's abuse. No other way to put it. Okay, jab stuff. Just a few things here. Lauren Boebert, Congresswoman Lauren Boebert, jabbed. Admittedly so, by the way. Her ex-husband, and children are all jabbed, apparently, and she had an emergency blood clot removed. Of course, no mention of the jabs, although you would think she would have to, given the fact that Marjorie Taylor Greene and Ron Johnson, of which she, of course, is associated with from time to time, has had hearings on this very subject, and yet here it happens to her. So again, this is from Fox59.com. Hospitalized with acute blood clot and then diagnosed with May-Thurner syndrome, which, according to the Cleveland Clinic, is a rare condition that disrupts blood flow by compressing a vein in the pelvis and can lead to blood clots. Yes, I'm sure that's exactly what's going on here. Again, it's the state of Colorado where she apparently received this medical treatment, UC Health Medical Center, of the Rockies. Wonder if it's the same doctors that are treating Deion Sanders. Wonder if they're openly admitting that this is shot-related. Probably not. Absolutely ridiculous. It says, additionally, women between the ages of 20 to 45 years old who have given birth are at greater risk of having the syndrome. What if they're jabbed? Again, no dot connecting here. They're on top of each other. She's jabbed. Admittedly so. Amazing. Again, lying about this or rationalizing it into some other condition is not helping the cause here. Not when stories like this, of course, are coming out. Again, this is from Zero Hedge. CDC releases hidden trove of COVID-19 vaccine injury reports. How much worse can it possibly get? Again, we have the symptoms. We know that they were hiding everything. I've been through some of those trial studies and exactly what was found within those. We know the different measures that they were hiding from people. But apparently here we have another 780,000 reports that were received shortly after the COVID-19 vaccine were rolled out, and it shows that people experienced a wide range of post-vaccination problems, including heart inflammation, miscarriages, and seizures, and death. Let's not forget that. Again, it almost doesn't matter at this point the number of documents that Pfizer releases or the CDC releases. They were all engaging in a criminal cover-up of a eugenics poison that was designed to depopulate. Again, that right there, I think, is a real big revelation that's occurred here. You couldn't get people to admit depopulation 3 years ago, even 4 years ago. Hell, if you brought up depopulation as being an agenda 10 years ago, people would have laughed at you. You could have held up a stack full of books and said, look, in these books, it says depopulation is an agenda of very bad people who run the world. Bad people run the world. They want us dead. They openly talk how they're going to depopulate, and one of them is through inoculation. You would have been laughed at. Wouldn't have mattered how many resources you brought to bear. Now look what's happening. It's happening. I mean, that's the thing. The depopulation agenda is occurring, and people are actually owning up to it now. But not Lauren Boebert. Too bad, too. You would hope that a politician or someone in the so-called limelight who claims to be representing Americans, which, let's face it, they aren't, but you would think that they would own up to a blatant depopulation agenda that does exist. Again, this is one of the reasons why Tom Rentz doesn't get he doesn't get invited to these meetings anymore by Ron Johnson. He's openly stated, I have government documents and whistleblowers who have told me that this, of course, is an agenda. This is being done on purpose. This is not an accident. That actually leads me to this very quickly. Dr. Gert Vanden Bosch, who you've probably seen his face or heard his name before, there was a piece of audio making the rounds last week, and I don't think I brought this up on the show, but if I did, forgive me because I'm going to repeat myself here. But it was a piece of audio, again, of him describing how these doctors and these vaccine manufacturers and the FDA and so on, these world health leaders, that they just made a mistake. That they just made a mistake and they got this wrong. And, I'm putting words in his mouth a little bit, but he essentially said that they shouldn't be blamed, that mistakes were made and that, again, steps were not taken and blah, blah, blah. Dr. Mike Yeadon, who I have a lot of respect for, he openly came out and said, look, don't move Gert Vanden Bosch's audio around like he's some hero. Mike Yeadon openly stated, Gert Vanden Bosch is a virologist. He thinks viruses are real. He's worked with immunology and in immunology his whole career. He openly stated about Gert Vanden Bosch's statements, he said there's no way that he doesn't know that this was intentional. He has to know that this was intentional. It's the only thing that explains everything that's, of course, happened throughout this entire time. He goes, so don't let the Gert Vanden Bosches of the world water down the message. Again, I recommend people follow Mike Yeadon on Telegram. It's the one place you can find him. He even lurks around on Substack in the comment sections from time to time too. But again, this was a giant intentional. Mike Yeadon knows it. And that's another question people should ask themselves. Why is Dr. Mike Yeadon not showing up during these Senate COVID hearings? And yet it's just this, consistent gang of players like Malone and Ryan Cole and Laura Logan and Del Bigtree and all these other people. Why don't you get Mike Yeadon in there openly stating this is a depopulation agenda. This is not an accident. This wasn't a whoopsie. This was a real depopulation agenda. And again, it's still in play. Yeah, there might be a handful of counties that don't have the shots anymore, but even so, that alone should prove to people that if these counties don't have them, it doesn't mean that they're stupid. It means that they are connecting the dots and figuring out what's going on. So then again, what's wrong with your county? What are you not paying attention to? And just to refresh everybody's memory too, again, I think it was AJ Gochik who brought this up, and one of his acquaintances or one of his friends out in California. He said that the reason that Ron Johnson isn't screaming about this as often as he should, and why people in Washington aren't, is not only because they receive kickbacks from the pharmaceutical industry, but they're all up for election in many cases, and their constituents are jabbed. So if they start going out there and calling for the removal of these shots from the counties and the districts that they represent, let alone the states, which they could all do in the blink of an eye logically, but they're not doing it because their own constituents are jabbed, and they're afraid that their constituents are going to turn on them. And we should. But that's another story for another time. Either way, their lack of action here should prove that they are not on our side. Two more quick ones here. This was from Gateway Pundit. My apologies for the reference. Again, you talk about being silent on the whole anti-Semitism thing and the hypocrisy of all of that. I mean, my God. The Hoff brothers, they couldn't be any worse than they already are. But either way, this is jab-related. It was titled, Moderna Developing an mRNA Vaccine for Multiple Diseases Reportedly Linked to the COVID Shot. That's right. More mRNA jabs to treat, so they say, jab-related illnesses from the mRNA and whatever other poison is in those shots. More jabs to solve your jab problem. You can't say it's not a depopulation agenda, ladies and gentlemen. You just can't. And the people not saying it are the problem. And then lastly, there's this. This is from newstarget.com. 1 dose of Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine contains over 200 billion DNA fragments that can incorporate into human DNA, causing cancer. It says the following here very quickly. Multiple laboratory studies now confirm that Pfizer's COVID-19 mRNA vaccine is heavily contaminated with plasmid DNA. The latest analysis finds that 1 dose of the Pfizer vaccine typically contains over 200 billion DNA fragments, and these DNA fragments can incorporate into the DNA of the vaccinated individual and interfere with the expression of oncogenes, if I'm saying that right, and tumor suppression genes. The DNA contamination has cancer implications for millions of people who are manipulated to take part in this biowarfare experiment, unquote. That right there, ladies and gentlemen, is called informed consent. And that right there is the thing that still doesn't exist in hospitals, doctors' offices, school districts, you name it, health departments, pick one, even professions. As you heard me bring up last week, attending these education conferences, you still have to be jabbed in many cases. It's still a requirement, unless you have the paperwork to get you out of it in some way. These people have lost their minds. They've literally killed themselves. And of course, as a lack of their own participation, they've destroyed their own businesses and they don't even know it. Not to mention, of course, all of the fear-mongering with the avian flu and all of this nonsense. It's absolutely ridiculous. But thanks for listening, everybody. I appreciate it. I'll catch you on Wednesday. Peace. Thank you for listening to American Education FM. Make sure and check out AmericanEducationFM.com for more information. Take care and God bless.